A few days before I created this video, I had a very important shower thought. What is the most amount of guns someone has ever physically put onto a battleship? As someone who runs a naval history channel, I'm sure you can imagine I have a Rolodex of battleships in my head. But of course, I came to the conclusion rather swiftly. HMS Agincourt or Rio de Janeiro or Sultan Osman, the battleship of three nations, had a total of 14 12-inch guns and 7 twin turrets. I mean, get a good look at this monster. In today's video, we're going to cover the history and design of this rather odd battleship. History. Anyway, to understand the history of HMS Agincourt, we have to understand the reason why she was ordered. Starting life off as the planned-to-be Brazilian battleship Rio de Janeiro, as they were in a naval arms race with Argentina and Chile in the first half of the 20th century, they had vast natural resources, notably rubber for the Brazilians. These nations were very well off, so much so they were building some of the most powerful battleships that money could buy. With this, the Brazilian government came to Britain and other nations' naval yards with great ambitions, wanting a battleship that carried the most powerful naval guns in existence to outdo the battleships of the Argentinians or the Chileans were building or planning to build at the time. In the preliminary designs, they came up with designs of over 30,000 tons and ships armed with 12 14-in guns, 10 15-in guns, or even 8 16-in guns. All these proposed designs exceeded the financial means Brazil had at the time to procure such a vessel. The Brazilians chose the British yard Armstrong over stiff competition from other foreign yards. They ended up deciding on preliminary design 1 for the basis of their new ship, displacing some 31,600 tons with a main battery of 12 14-in guns. With this, the Brazilians would certainly have the most powerful dreadnought in South America. However, the Brazilian government that decided on this design soon fell out of power, and a new one put financial restrictions on their building program, so they could focus on restoring order to the country. In the process, they canceled the contract that they had made with Armstrong. Now, Armstrong, wanting this contract to be fulfilled, sent out a party headed by Eustace Tennyson Decourt, the future director of naval construction, with alternative sketches for another battleship that would be less extensive than the initial design the Brazilians had chosen. But still, this design mounted the most heavy guns ever put on a battleship until that point. With 14 12-in guns, the Brazilian government very quickly accepted this design, and the battleship construction could get going. However, in November of 1913, the Brazilian government came under some more, and this time even more severe financial strain due to less expensive rubber from Malaya that undermined the market value of Brazil's rubber. Only 10 months after the ship's launch, with doubts if Brazil could make the payments for the battleship, she would go up for sale. Ottoman purchase. The battleship went on the market for others to purchase as it sat in the yard. There were talks of the Italians, Russians, or even the Greeks buying it. However, for approximately $2.25 million from a French loan, the Ottoman Empire purchased the ship. The ship was renamed Sultan Osman I. It would pair nicely with the other dreadnought being built by British yards for the Ottoman Empire, the Russia, which was similar to a King George V class, carrying 103 13.5-in guns, although it did take inspiration from other classes as well. These two vessels were costing the impoverished Ottomans almost £6 million, with the money being raised through taxes, not paying civil servants, and finally, donations from Turkish towns and villages, with women literally selling their hair to help pay for the battleships, making the nation rather invested in getting their hard-earned dreadnoughts. The Ottoman Navy was in somewhat of a revitalization, constructing a new fleet, hoping to counter the rapidly growing Greek one in the Mediterranean and the Russian one in the Black Sea. The Greeks building a dreadnought in Germany and acquiring 2 pre-dreadnoughts from the United States, while the Russians were building the Empress Maria-class dreadnoughts in the Black Sea. Specifications. Before we continue our story with the soon-to-be Agincourt, we should discuss the particulars of the ship. She was laid down in September 1911, launched in January 1913, and completed in August 1914. She had a full load displacement of 27,850 tons initially. As for machinery, she had 22 Badcock and Willis boilers, giving steam to Parsons' direct drive turbines, powering 4 screws, giving her, as designed, 34,000 shaft horsepower and a 22-knot top speed. As for armaments, she carried 14 12-inch 45 caliber guns in twin turrets along the center line of the ship, 26-inch guns, 10 3-inch quick-firing guns, 4 3-pounders, and 3 21-inch torpedo tubes. Her armor scheme called for a 9-inch main belt and an upper belt of 6-inch. Bulkheads, depending on the area, would vary between 3 and 6-inch. Decks would also vary between 1.5-inch and 2-inch. Barbettes had a maximum thickness of 9-inch. The main battery turrets had a face thickness of 12-inch, 8-inch on the sides, and 10-inch on the rear. The conning tower had a maximum thickness of 12-inch. She saw several changes throughout the war. Originally, she was designed with fewer 6-inch guns, but 2 were added by the British when she was seized, and the anti-torpedo nets were removed. The flying deck and midship as well, along with several other things. Notable additions throughout the war would be searchlights, along with improvements to the fire director control and some anti-aircraft guns later in the war. Something interesting I should mention is the fact that the 12-inch guns on the Agincourt were similar to the guns put on Dreadnought or the Invincible class, rather than any modern British caliber which had moved to 13.5-inch or even 15-inch. Military, we should discuss the fact that she differed from British ships even though she was built in British yards. To take from the Windfall battleships Agincourt, Canada, Erin and Eagle, and the Balkan and Latin American arms races by Aidan Dodson. In military terms, Agincourt was very different from any ship currently in UK service. Designed for South American waters, her nominal endurance was double that of many contemporaries. But her coal stowage was assessed as poorly designed, with bulkheads pierced on the lower deck, including by 2 ammunition passages. Ships laid down for the Royal Navy in 1911, King George V's, had side protection ranging in thickness from 8 to 12-inch. In Asin, the range was from 4 to 9-inch. Barbette armor was similar, and Aziner's turret armor was actually greater than that of Royal Navy contemporaries. But underwater protection was lacking as compared to the King George V class, making Aziner's overall armor scheme more akin to the battlecruisers Lion, Queen Mary, Princess Royal, and Tiger. July Crisis. By July of 1914, the battleship was being fitted out for its new owner by the Elswick Yard, including taking off the nameplates, carrying instructions, and the like, which were in Portuguese, fitting the Admiral stateroom with mahogany paneling and other fineries, while crew accommodations were made to fit the Turkish standards of living. Notably, the bathrooms were made appropriate for the Turkish style of squatting while using the restroom. It should be noted that not all of the 12-inch guns were in place by this time as well. With the July crisis continuing, the British Admiralty looked on anxiously as the 2 Turkish battleships were nearing completion. The Ottomans were even more anxious to get their hands on their 2 new battleships. Rashido was finished in early July, but the British Admiralty advised that she stay in the United Kingdom until Sultan Osman I could be completed, and the 2 battleships could head to the Ottoman Empire together. Meanwhile, the Admiralty was suggesting to Armstrong and Vickers that there was no real need to hurry to deliver these 2 vessels. However, the pressure mounted to deliver the ships as on the 27th of July. An Ottoman passenger liner arrived in the Tyne, carrying 500 sailors for Sultan Osman I. The delivery into Turkish hands was expected on the 2nd of August, while on the 1st, the 13th 12-inch gun had been installed, and the 14th was expected later that day, but there was no ammunition aboard. Meanwhile, on the 31st, Winston Churchill, First Lord of the Admiral, with war in Europe impending, informed the builders that the government intended to seize the ships as they could not permit the ships to be handed over to a foreign power. There was a clause in the contracts that permitted the British government to buy back the ships in a national emergency. Although the Ottomans were not likely to be willing to sell the ships, Armstrong feared that the Turkish captain and sailors might attempt to seize the ship and hoist the Turkish flag to take from Dodson. Again, all of this was of consequence of not only the specter of the UK becoming involved in the war, but concerns as to the likely orientation of the Ottoman government if hostilities did indeed break out. Accordingly, on the morning of August 2, 1914, a company of the Sherwood Foresters Infantry Regiment boarded Sultan Osman I. So effectively, the British seized the battleships in castles of steel, Britain, Germany, and the winning of the Great War at Sea by Robert K. Massey. He writes, "Church never apologized. The Turkish battleships were vital to us." He later said, "With a margin of only 7 dreadnoughts, we could not afford to do without these 2 fine ships." He attempted to patch up the damage by offering that at the end of the war, Turkey should receive either the 2 requisitioned dreadnoughts fully repaired or else their full value. He added that, in any case, Britain would pay Turkey £1,000 a day for every day that she kept them. The offer would stand as long as Turkey remained neutral. With that, Sultan Osman I was renamed Agincourt and commissioned on the 7th of August in Devonport with some of the guns still not in place. Previously, the royal yacht Victoria and Albert was sent to Portsmouth, where her crew was to become the backbone of the crew of Agincourt. Eventually, with everything in place, she would sail to Scapolo, arriving on the 26th of August, 1914 too. Join the rest of the Grand Fleet. Battle Zainor joined the 4th Battle Squadron of the Grand Fleet, where her rather inexperienced crew needed to train. Being a rather eclectic mixture of raw recruits, sailors who were convicted of minor crimes, and those who formerly crewed the royal yachts, as I mentioned, the 4th Battle Squadron would consist of Dreadnought, the Bellerophon, and several other ships, later to be joined by the newer battleships, including the Air and the former Radia. Now, as for Agincourt's career, there really isn't much to say besides the fact that she did, in fact, fight in the Battle of Jutland, where she would be accompanied by the battleships Hercules, Revenge, and the flagship Malbor. The unit could be described as a hodgepodge, as it was certainly the most diverse unit, as every ship was from a different class. Anyway, Agincourt participated in the Battle of Jutland, where she fired on the German battle line, including the battle cruisers, although it's not clear if she hit anything. After the Battle of Jutland, much like before it, there isn't anything of great note besides escorting convoys to Norway and back to Britain, as well as being present at the surrendering of the High Seas Fleet at the end of the war. Disposal. In March of 1919, she was placed in the reserve fleet at Rosyth, and in April of 1921, she was placed on the disposal list, but then unit for experimental work, which was quite fascinating. As you see, the Royal Navy was thinking about its next opponents, and they were on the other side of the globe from the UK, these being the United States or Japan. So in case of such a conflict, the Royal Marines or the Royal Navy itself would need a mobile base of operations. And due to her size, they thought Agincourt might be great for this mobile depot-type role. Still, it wasn't in the budget, and this idea wasn't loved. There were attempts to sell her back to Brazil, but nothing came of it. By December of 1922, she was sold to Rosyth Shipbreaking Company. She was still there intact in 1924, and to comply with the Washington Naval Treaty, she was cut in half, and the 2 sections were taken out within 24 hours. Thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe as it'll help the channel to grow. Until next time, my friends, have a great week.